Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Top Power BI Updates You Actually Need to Know. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. You will be in listen-only mode. If you have any questions during today's presentation, feel free to submit them into the chat window, and our team will get back to you within the next 24 hours. This webinar is also being recorded, so if you have any technical difficulties or would like to re-watch the content at a later date, we will be sending out an email with the recording over the next couple of days. My name is Marianne Warner, and I'll be kicking things off. A quick introduction to who we are. CCG helps organizations become more insights-driven, solve complex challenges, and accelerate growth through industry-specific data and analytics solutions. We empower customers to gain greater visibility into their data and make informed decisions in order to achieve a competitive advantage. Our strategic offerings are designed to deliver speed to value, improve business outcomes, and unify teams around a common view of trusted insights. If you have any questions about CCG, our information will be on the last slide of this presentation, or you could visit us at ccganalytics.com. Now to introduce you to our speaker today. Andy Lawrence is a tenured business intelligence and data visualization leader with a focus in Microsoft Power BI. Currently, Andy serves as a senior Power BI consultant at CCG and the leader of the Power BI User Group, or PUG, of Tampa Bay. His experience is in T-SQL, data modeling, reporting, and data strategy across retail, finance, medical, and educational industries. Andy is backed by an MBA and Master's of Science in Business Analytics and Information Systems, which, when paired with his experience, enables him to educate and empower his clients in all things analytics. Now I will hand over the mic to Andy to dive into the content.
All right, thank you very much, Marianne. So thank you, Marianne, and thanks to everybody for giving me their time today for this webinar. We've already gone over the background, so I'm going to be giving a breakdown of the updates chronologically, starting in late 2018, and then a demo of some of the selected updates, and we'll be ending with a Q&A session. So before we begin, I just want to add in a few caveats that there's a tremendous number of updates in Power BI on a month-to-month basis, so I'm not going to be able to go over everything over the course of an entire year. And likewise, I'm going to be sticking towards most of the beginner visual side updates and not as much on the reporting layer architectural side, because some of it is a bit advanced and some of it would take too long. Aggregations alone would take me over a half hour to review. So we're going to stick to most of the beginner stuff so I can get this through pretty quickly. So starting in November of 2018, everybody sees this now because this went out of preview and into the general offering of Power BI. There was a new filter pane, and there's a modeling view where you can look at multiple tabs to cut different sections of the model out to make edits and inspect when you have a very large complex model. So now starting in 2019, if we look at the two on the left, there were some updates on the way that visuals interact with each other. Before, you could never click on a line chart to have a cross filter any other visual. And all of the default was always cross highlighting, which I'll be demonstrating later on in the broadcast. On the right side, we had some more analytics visuals. So not only do we have a standalone key influencers visual, you can now right click on specific bar charts to be able to generate analytics based on the increase or decrease month to month. So moving on to March of 2019, the first of two changes to the slicer visual was dropped, where we can force a single selection now. For anybody that's been using Power BI for a very long time, a user being able to click multiple selections was a plague that you couldn't really control, and that's something they fixed. So with Bing Maps, they never had a heat map option, and they load a bit faster than ArcGIS. Typically, I find ArcGIS to be the preferable option just in terms of its offerings and performance, but the Bing Map is sometimes requested by clients because it loads faster, and now it has a heat option. And finally, we don't have to click on the bar specifically when we want to cross highlight or cross filter. We can click on the axis label as well. Moving on to April of 2019, the first of several changes to initial formatting took place. By the time I've gone through the entire year, we not only can conditionally format the visual titles, we can do the background as well. So I'll be going through some of that. And we can drill through not only from tab to tab, but also across reports. Moving on to May, there's a performance analyzer pane that can check to see how visuals are being taxed when they're loading, so we can see exactly how many milliseconds certain sections of it are loading and the reasons why. So if some of your reports are taking a long time to generate, this is a good diagnostic tool. Aggregations, as I mentioned before, are a bit too complicated for the purview of this demonstration, but the short gist of it is that you can now make a composite model that has both direct query and import mode, where you can have very, very large tables on direct query and then the aggregated tables in import with measures that can dynamically flip between the two. So if you're outside of the tabular model and you want to create a report that has a table with over 1 billion rows in it, you can put that part in direct query and put an aggregated version in an import and then use both simultaneously. Now, incremental refresh also I will not be demonstrating. Before it was only available on premium capacity, but looking at February of this year, it's now available to Pro as well. So in a future broadcast, I will be demonstrating incremental refresh. This allows us not to have to wipe and reload a full table with an import and refresh process. We can just incrementally refresh sections of the table instead. Moving on to June through August. So we have another update to the visual slicer. So we can change the number of available options, whereas before you had to have the full set. And then beyond that, there's some functionality that was ported over from both PowerPoint and from Excel. On the PowerPoint side, you can have group visuals together as you're moving them, which is something a lot of people were using in PowerPoint. And then when you're making a table visual, just like in Excel, you can create a set of icons that are conditionally formatted, which you'll see in a lot of Excel reporting that you can now see in Power BI. It seems like to some degree, some functionality in Microsoft products are starting to converge, and you're starting to see a lot of it inside Power BI. Moving on to September, there's been some changes to the default themes, and there's been a change to the ribbon where we can now preview some updates that I'll be demonstrating shortly. The conditional formatting options have been updated again, where we can also change the border color on top of the background and the title color as well. And there's drill through alt text. So when you hover your mouse over a particular visual, you can have the alt text describe the fact that there's an option to drill through, whereas before the user would have to know that there's a drill through option and then right click. October through December, there's yet a new standard visual called the Q&A that I'll be demonstrating that allows a user to type in a natural language question and then generate a visual or a table on top of it. And then finally, one of my favorites is that we can now customize and export themes. Again, anybody that's been using Power BI for an extremely long time, if they wanted to make their own custom theme, they're going in and editing the JSON file directly. But now there's a custom UI inside Power BI to do that, where you can not only change the theme, but then you can export it and make it your own. And then finally, October through December, the KPI visual has gone through some format setting upgrades where we can now change a lot of the font and the color and the text size, whereas the KPI used to be a one-size-fits-all option, which was really good if it was the option you wanted, but not so much if you wanted to make any customization to it. And then finally, the filter pane toggle is something you can turn off completely if you need to gain some extra real estate in a report, which is available on that new pane, the new ribbon, excuse me, that I'll be demonstrating in just a moment. So those are all the updates that I found that were consequential just in terms of visual creation from January through December of this year. So now we're going to go into a demonstration. So what we have here is an example report that I put together with some dummy data showing a basic report with a slicer, a line chart, a sideways, and a horizontal bar. So I'm going to be going through with my little cheat sheet here some of the simpler updates, starting out with the filter pane. So we all have access to this. The filter pane is here where we can see what, if anything, is being filtered on any particular visual or on the page itself, or we can expand and contract it as well. So two of the main updates for cross filtering. Before, when we had a line chart, there was no ability to click on a particular point on the line to have it filter anything else. And now that functionality is there. So if I click on a certain dot, it does change the rest of the report, which is a minor change, but it's something that made a line chart unfeasible if you really wanted to use it to cross filter other visuals. So you used to have a bar chart for that, now you don't. And likewise with bar charts, sometimes, and again, if you've been using this program for a long time, if you wanted to cross filter and some of the options had a very, very tiny amount of data, you had to just pixel perfect click on exactly where this was to get it to work. And it was almost impossible. But now you can also just click on the actual axis label instead, and it still works just fine. So those are two minor updates just to solve some of the annoyances of Power BI, but there's another larger issue where we can see if I'm filtering here, the cross highlighting is just pulling off everything and not really showing anything of worth. And same when I click on here, it's really dropping to the point where you're not even gaining any information off of it. So this is a main frustration for me when I'm done building a report, and it became very natural for me to have to go into format, edit the interactions, and then come in and start changing the way they all talk to each other one by one. Like coming here and doing this, and it was sort of a frustrating way to complete a report, just so when I could finally click on things, it would cross filter instead. So there was a major update to that, which I'll be showing here. When you go to File and go to Options and Settings, now there's going to be global report settings and there's going to be current file. So if we look at current file in the report settings here, there's now an option that says change the default visual interaction from cross highlighting to cross filtering. If you enable this, then any new visuals you create by default will cross filter rather than cross highlight, which I heavily prefer. Again, if you've been using the program a long time, and this was a long time coming, we finally don't have to go in and fix every visual once we're done with the report. And while I'm in the options setting in global this time, if I look at preview features, I really encourage anybody who's using Power BI to look at the feature previews, because this is a way to get a jump on some of the new functionality before it's rolled out. So the shape map visual has been in preview for years now, really since time immemorial. I don't know when this is ever going to be fully rolled out, but I clicked on the updated ribbon and a customized current theme to demonstrate some of the new functionality. So that's why if you look at my ribbon here, it looks a lot different than what you may see when you open up Power BI, because I'm using the preview feature. But I'll be getting into the customized ribbon a little bit later in this demonstration. So moving on to a filter visual, there's two things you used to never be able to do that now you can. So the first thing is I can remove some of the options from the list by going into the filter pane, and I can just start pulling a few out. And then the filter visual doesn't even allow those options, whereas before you had to show the full set. Now, the other issue is that a user always used to be able to control click multiple options. And if you didn't want them doing that, it was actually impossible to police. And it was very frustrating. You had to coach end users that were consuming reports never to control click when you really only want one selection. But now, when I open up the visualizations and go to the paintbrush and go to the selection controls, I can toggle on single select. And this becomes a radio button where I physically can't select any more than one option. So it took a long time for them to roll this out, but I'm very pleased with this because now I can really force a single select anytime I want to. But for this, we'll leave the report wide open. So moving on, grouping visuals together. So if I want to control click on multiple visuals like this, and then right click, I can group them all. And now they're all sort of as one. So when I'm moving them, they all move together. So this, if I want to keep the orientation of certain visuals next to each other, I can do this by grouping them, which is something we always saw a lot with Microsoft PowerPoint. And then moving on to something we had in Excel for a long time is making conditionally formatted icons onto a table visual. So here I have a dummy table with some accounts and their actuals. So I click on this and I go into the conditional formatting of actual. There's going to be a new option here where I can select icons rather than data bars and font colors and backgrounds. So I'll go in here and there's a rich option of types of icons here that I can choose. In fact, I think I'll stick with this one for now. And I'm going to leave the automation here just to select by default what we want. Hit OK. And now just like that, I have icons across my my numbers here on this table visual, which we always had in Excel, but now we have in Power BI as well. So this is a very fun, easy way to add a little more pop to some of your tables. So finally, conditional formatting. If I select one of these visuals here, there's actually 3 places where I can apply conditional formatting on the border, on the background, and the title color. So when I go in here, and some people that are new to Power BI have trouble finding this, but when you're selecting a color, there's a little ellipsis up here. And if you select this, you can change the conditional formatting of the background to be dynamic, which then you can also do for the title, both the font color and the background color. You can change the conditional formatting. And then finally, the last one they rolled out was for the borders as well. So we can make a border and give it a certain color, and then also conditionally format that as well. So almost anything in the visual you can format conditionally, whereas that was not available in 2018. So it's a good way to have some visuals turn red or green based on the performance of how the user's clicking on specific filters. So these are some of the easier things that I put together from all of 2019. So we're going to move on to some of the more analytics side. So we're going to start out showing you a Bing map and an ArcGIS map. And as I alluded to before, the ArcGIS map tends to load a bit slower. It requires more internet bandwidth, but the actual visual output I think is generally superior. But some of your clients may prefer the Bing map because, as you see, it loads a bit faster. And now finally, if I want to recreate this heat map in Bing, I can just come in here and just click on heat map on, and I can create a heat map as well. So there's a little better functionality on the Bing map side that matches what we already had with ArcGIS, which is the more custom map visual. Moving on from there, there's a new Q&A visual, which is a selection in the out-of-the-box settings in Power BI, where we can either type in a natural language question saying, for instance, what is the direct expense by account, or we can show a bunch of suggestions. So I'm just saying, what are the top accounts by direct expense? And if I click on this, it's going to run a quick report for me, showing me these top accounts and the direct expense as a bar chart. And if I decide I like the way this looks, I'm going to actually switch this into a visual. So from now on, this is a clustered bar chart showing exactly what I selected in the Q&A. So the performance analyzer, I'll show very briefly. So if I go into view, there is an option for a performance analyzer. And this part is pretty cool. So if I look at this ArcGIS map, for instance, and I want to know why it's loading so slow, I can start recording and I refresh all the visuals on the page and I see the ArcGIS map reload and I hit stop. And I get an idea of the ArcGIS map loaded in 426 milliseconds versus the Bing map, which was only 260. And if I want to know why, I can dig in. It's not really the DAX that's doing it. The visual display and the bandwidth, which is displaying as other, was causing some of the slowdown. So this is a good diagnostic tool. So moving on from there, I would also like to do a little more analytics. So the first thing I'll do is check out the key influencers visual, which is another out-of-the-box new visual that Power BI has. And for this, I want to analyze the actuals and I want to explain it by account. For the analyze, we're going to need some sort of numerical value, and for the explain by, we're going to want some sort of categorical value. And I'll make this a little bit larger so we can see it. So when account is service-free work, the actual expenses are going to increase by 335, and when it's training time, it'll increase by $72. So this is a pretty cool little analytics visual that you can just create very quickly. Anytime you're presenting, you want to explain why certain factors are driving other factors. This is the way to do it very fast and in an automated fashion. Now, there's something else we can do, which I'll bring back to this side. If we look at the direct expenses by month, we can see sometimes they're rising, sometimes they're falling. So I'm going to right click on May, and I can analyze this and explain the decrease. And what this does is it spits out a long list of reports showing you in a categorical sense with a waterfall chart what was driving some of the expenses. And it looks like the shop cleanup and the service rework and this dummy report was driving a lot of the expenses, causing the expenses to go down. And if we don't like this particular layout, I can switch it to here just to show a little bit more of the linear trend. But if I like this and I decide this is something that I think is useful while I'm giving a presentation, I can pin it. So now it's actually part of the report itself. And I can just go in here and Control X. And I'm going to go back to this analysis page where I think it's a little more relevant. I'm going to let these load. And again, ArcGIS always takes a little bit longer. And now I have this analytics visual that I generated on the fly from the bar chart of a different page. So I'll also point very briefly towards the personalization of this. So we can now pin some of the custom visuals right to the pane where it looks more like it's part of the out-of-the-box section. We can also unpin as well. So if you don't like pie charts, which I recommend almost never putting in a report, you can unpin them and then it just drops right out. And we don't have it here anymore. So moving on from there, we'll be looking at the default and the exporting of themes. So I already have the view tab open where we can see different themes here, and I can click in and look at different. This one's a little loud, so let's find a different one that's a little bit easier to read. So what's cool about this is I can not only select a custom theme, but if I click this drop down arrow, I can go to customize current theme. and I can select what actual colors comprise that theme. So if I want to change it very easily, I can. Before, if we ever wanted to make our own theme or make an edit to it, we would have to save the JSON and then open it and make those edits there. And now there's this custom UI. So I can apply and save. And then finally, if I like this theme that I've created that's custom to me, I can export that theme as well. And I can name it whatever I want and share it with other people. So it's a lot easier now to make Power BI themes, whereas before, it really took a sort of developer mindset to understand how to make edits to JSON. So that covers to me what I think was relevant for all of 2019 in terms of the visuals that, or just sort of the edits that made some of the visual creation easier. But Marianne, if you would like to, I can pass it back to you if you have any questions for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy. Those were some awesome tips we learned today and updates. We do have a couple of questions coming in. So the first one is, what would you preview for any 2020 updates?
So for 2020, I think the biggest change is there's a hierarchical slicer now. That's something I'll be looking forward to demoing shortly. So usually if you had a filter visual, you just had a flat list of options, but now you can include the hierarchy. So if you had, for instance, year, month, and day, you can move up and down inside the hierarchy inside the filter visual as well. I think that's going to be pretty interesting to see. And then beyond that, the incremental refresh that used to be only for premium capacity is now available for pro users as well. So I myself don't have a premium license. I only have pro, so I can finally start playing with incremental refresh. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of that functionality and then demoing that in a future webinar.
Awesome. On a related note, what updates have been made in Tabular?
So there's been a major update in Tabular that I didn't show within the context of this presentation since it was only Power BI, but inside Tabular, we now have calculation groups. So the idea of a calculation group is running a certain DAX syntax against any selected measure that users brought into a report. Where usually if we had a calculate function, the calculate syntax would want to reference a direct measure. Now, instead of having explicit measure, there's a DAX syntax called selected measure, which doesn't care what a user is bringing into a report. So if we wanted to say calculate whatever measure as of last year, if a user brings in sales or units or cost, it doesn't matter. It still runs the calculation properly. So if you're in Tabular and you're making a whole lot of measures, and sometimes in certain clients you might be making hundreds, now you can make a calculation group that just runs a lot of similar DAX calculations, all as sort of a categorical axis based on whatever visual they're bringing in, whatever measure they're bringing in the visual. It's been pretty revolutionary for me because I deal a lot in tabular architecture. So it's something I'm demoing to clients and I'll look forward to showing in a future presentation, but not exactly just for Power BI.
Awesome. And I'm not sure if you already hit the answer for this, but what syntax and DAX would you like to talk about?
So just as the same way that Power BI updates monthly, sometimes the Power BI team rolls out some updates in DAX, which is the data analysis expressions, the syntax that drives a lot of the programming in Power BI, much like sum, count, and average you would see in Excel. There's been a few pretty interesting updates. If you ever use the all function, that's a way that you break filter context. So I've used a lot of all and all selected and all except. There's a new one called all cross filter that only breaks the filter context based on what the user is cross filtering from visual to visual or table to table. There's a quarter function. So there's not just day and month and year, there's also calendar quarters. And then finally, like the biggest one, and this also drives the calculation groups, is having the selected measure syntax. So instead of having anything explicit, we can allow the user to drag in any measure into a report and then use that selected measure calculation inside of a calculate to run a list of syntax calculations against anything the user prefers. So DAX is very interesting and important to learn, but it's also changing and updating frequently. So I definitely encourage anybody that's a Power BI expert to stay on top of it.
That's fair. Now, I'm going to throw in my own personal question. You showed a ton of updates from 2019. Which one are you most excited about?
I think the analytics, which I'll show again very briefly here. So the first page that I showed was just all a bunch of changes to visuals, which I think is useful. It makes everything a little bit prettier. But on the analysis side, I really like being able to run full analytics for the key influencers. And then also just being able to right click on a bar chart that has a time series and then just analyze and explain the decrease. So instead of creating a dashboard that an executive might be using, if I have to provide a presentation explaining why sales had dropped a particular quarter, I can have Power BI explain that for me, and that gives me a jump on what I'll be presenting on if I want to throw that into a PowerPoint. So it makes things a lot easier for me, especially when I'm giving presentations. So in that sense, I'm the most excited about that update.
Awesome. All right, well, that's all the questions we had. So thank you so much, Andy. And to our viewers, thank you for joining today's webinar. If you have any questions about today's topic or would like to hear other topics about data strategy and Power BI, feel free to contact us at info@ccganalytics.com. Otherwise, you'll be receiving an email in the next 24 hours with a recording and the slides used for today's presentation. Additional information can also be found on our website at ccganalytics.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the
Thank
rest
you,
of your
Mary.
day.